I'll let you all connect the sound. Hello, happy Thursday to everybody. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 768th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for part one of Woman, Life, Freedom, a series of conversations organized in partnership with artist Morehshin Allahyari. Today's conversation will be about building political power through feminist collective work. And for it, we welcome, with gratitude, Ozi Ozar, a member of Begoo Collective, Manijeh Moradian, and we're thrilled to welcome poet Rooja Mohassessy here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land that we're speaking from. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's host and organizer of the series. Morehshin Allahyari is a New York-based Iranian Kurdish artist using 3D simulation, video, sculpture, and digital fabrication as tools to refigure myth and history. Through archival practices and storytelling, her work weaves together complex counter-narratives in opposition to the lasting influence of Western technological colonialism in the context of Swana. Her work has been part of numerous exhibitions, festivals, and workshops at venues throughout the world, and you can see her work currently on view and refigured at the Whitney Museum in New York on view through July 3rd. And with that, it is my pleasure to pass it over to Morehshin.
Thank you so much, Chloe, Fang, and all the other staff of Brooklyn Rail for making this space for us. And I am also so honored today to be joining by such an amazing group of people that I am inspired by every day and excited to share this space and conversations with. So first and foremost, I wanted to start this panel by paying respect to those who've been fighting in Iran for freedom and access to the most basic human rights, especially women and those of marginalized communities who's been in the front line of the Jiyan, Azadî, Women, Life, Freedom Revolution. And I am honored to also welcome 3 participants, each representing a collective, which they will tell you about in a bit. So I'm going to do a very fast bio reading before we get to the questions. Bahare is a multidisciplinary artist born in Tehran, Iran in 1991, the year the internet was made available for unrestricted commercial use. She uses digital time-based strategies in presenting work that fuses video, projection mapping, sculpture, text, sound, and performance to explore the uncapturable qualities of her diasporic body, fragmented culture, and transnational identity. Ozi Ozar, born in Tehran, is a digital content creator and theater professional queer artist living in Berlin and Frankfurt. Ozi studied theater and film direction in Tehran and dramaturgy in Frankfurt. Ozi's artistic approach revolves around comedy, interactive theater, and the translation of social media functions into theater and vice versa, focusing on the discourse of identity politics and queerness, utilizing social media platforms as a stage. Since beginning of the Iran's revolution, Ozi has been collaborating with Women, Life, Freedom Collective of Berlin. Manijeh Moradian is an assistant professor in the Department of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Barnard College, Columbia University. She received her PhD in American Studies from NYU and her MFA in Creative Nonfiction from Hunter College, City University of New York. Her book, This Flame Within, Iranian Revolutionaries in the United States, was recently published by Duke University Press. And everyone, please go buy it, read it, and support it. Okay, so now I'm gonna just go ahead and start with a bit of a descriptionary question, which is that I would appreciate if each of you give a little bit of background about the collective or network that you're part of, that you're presenting today. Maybe talk about some of the highlights of your statements, mission, how, when did you come together, and also how many members approximately do you have, and any other information that you would like to share about your collective. Who wants to go first? Manijeh Jan.
Sure, I can go first, and let me just say thank you for including me in this conversation today. I'm really excited to listen and learn from the other folks here. So I've been working with the Feminists for Jina network, and this is a network that has kind of local chapters or affiliates or collectives in many cities in Europe and North America. It formed rather quickly, just really, you know, in the days after the uprising in Iran began. And it really formed through relationships, through word of mouth, through already existing networks of feminist activists, mostly based in Europe, in Berlin, folks who had been active in Iran. And I think this is really important. So just to be clear, I was born in the United States. So I don't share all of the same experiences with the majority members of the network. But the way that it really formed was by feminist activists who had been involved in various kinds of campaigns and organizing, grassroots organizing in Iran, in particular, the 1 million signatures campaign, which for those who may not be familiar with it, was a really important grassroots movement in Iran that I think began just after Khatami was elected. Or actually, no, it began actually towards the end of his second term. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up my dates. But around 2005, and it was really an incredible mobilization that trained grassroots organizers all over the country to go out into the streets and collect signatures to try to overturn 10 discriminatory laws against women. So through this process of collecting signatures, many relationships, and organizing and building that movement, many people got to know each other, people got experience organizing, people developed themselves as feminist activists. And those relationships have lasted in many cases into exile, right? So as people were forced to leave Iran in the aftermath of the suppression of the women's movement, the Green Uprising, various things, had to leave Iran, they stayed connected, they stayed in contact. And so it's through, so Feminist for Jina kind of comes out of those relationships, that history, that background. Because of the way that Iranians have had to spread across the, especially Europe and North America, those relationships and networks were already transnational, right, in exile, in diaspora. So it only took, it was very quick, actually. I mean, it happened so fast that local groups sprung up in response to a call that was put out for October 2nd, 2022, as a global day of feminist solidarity with the uprising in Iran. So there had been other mobilizations, but Feminist for Jina said, we need a day of feminist solidarity. And so folks mobilized, organized. I've been working in New York City, as I said, and we organized a rally in Washington Square Park that was deeply moving. People, brought all of their signs and slogans and dreams and hopes. And it was kind of a space where, for those of us who wish we could be, on the streets in Iran, whose hearts were there, to actually occupy public space, in some cases to cut our hair, to sing some of the same songs that we'd seen, from the videos coming out of Iran, and to kind of participate, to put our bodies into some kind of motion and stance of resistance and solidarity. So it was a very moving action, October 2nd. It happened in cities, as I said, across Europe and North America. And that's also where many people found Feminist for Jina and then joined as well. So through a combination of activist and friendship networks, and then this sort of public mobilization is kind of how we formed initially.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe
I can follow.
Yes, please.
Well, I would follow them then because I also got to know Feminist for Jina through our collective because some of our members were, I mean, we are also scattered all around the world in a way. So I happened to, like, I thought that we are basically the only collective out there when we started. And then one of our members was like, yeah, I was in the meeting of Feminist for Jina. I was like, who are they even? Like, and how, yeah, it was very interesting for me to see that, like, these grassroots feminist movements are not just based in Europe or based in Berlin, but rather, like, you can find it in the community of Iranians in diaspora. Our collective, or the collective that I collaborate with, let's put it in words like that, as we are more of like a fluid space and people can actually get in and get out, or at least we're trying to establish it like that. We basically started and in, I think, the third week of September. We all met in a demo here that was organized by Bolangu, which is like another collective that is working in Berlin since a longer time, which has like a very, let's say, deeper root in the Kurdish resistance and the movements of, I have to like also translate some words in my head from German to English because I just got to know some of these terms only in German, so I never thought of them out of it. So it's, yeah, just to state that somewhere in between. But anyhow, we met actually in a demonstration there, and it was like a such a nice, safer space where we didn't have this whole stupid conversation about what's the flag, what's bloody, like people were very correct, and we were constantly thinking of the safety of the others, about the media being there, what sort of pictures do we put on the social media, what how does it impact the people in Iran? Like let's put it even like further than that, like forget about our safety, are we being counterproductive or not? And this was a very nice, but however a very tiny vibe there. And then we became a Telegram group, and everyone started adding the people they trusted. And then suddenly overnight we were over 100 people who wanted to do things in Berlin. And then we started our first demonstration, which was a week after that, which nearly 3,000 people showed up, and we were like not prepared at all. We didn't have any idea that, okay, how do we do it really correctly? Like we are all people who have expertise in different fields. Like I'm very good at affecting or influencing audience because I studied dramaturgy and directing, so I know how to trick people. Let's put it in words like that. But at the same time, my studies are very on how to maintain or produce a safer space. However, I never thought of it as a demonstration, so it was completely out of my expertise. And then there were other people who had like studied management or something, so everyone started to come together and put their expertise together. And then 2 weeks later, we had another demonstration here where we organized ourselves for 3,000 people, and then 10,000 people showed up, and we were like, okay, what's happening? And one thing we did very thoroughly was that we wrote a safer space concept and just shared it with the audience that, okay, this is how we're going to demonstrate. This is how we are going to a public space, and this is how are we going to tolerate each other. And these are the stuff we will not tolerate, and we would really stay with it. And people really didn't like it. Felt like elementary school where people are very afraid of the principle. Like they really didn't want to bend the law. Like there are moments where someone wants to chant something, but they wouldn't do it. It was very nice. And also like people were heavily touched by the revolution in Iran and kind of traumatized by the news coming out. So no one really wanted to start this stupid shit show of like going after things that would, let's say, affect the unity that we had. And then and we also, however, learned how to be more inclusive because we are a very, let's say, leftist circle. So when it comes to the monarchy, when it comes to the former Shah and everything, we have certain ideas and beliefs, and we need to bend that a little bit because we want to have an inclusive demonstration for everyone. And so like it became a point for us to go a little bit further. And then we had this huge demonstration on 22nd of October where 120,000 people showed up, like over 120,000. We assume it would have been more, but we weren't allowed to have drones there, so it's just a guess basically. And that was like a peak moment for all of us, because we really managed to put like something that the Iranians in diaspora didn't manage to do in last 44 years, of making a day of unity, of bringing so much diversity involved that everyone can build their own blocks and just be in their own safer space. And if there is a fight, they have their own block, you know, like they can just go there and feel like, okay, I can exist in this side. And I mean, when we're talking about marginalized community, they are marginalized communities. So like we kind of managed to put all these different demonstrations at the same place. And it was like a very, very interesting moment for us all. Yet after this demonstration, some stuff happened. Like my house got broken into. I had a message 2 weeks before that from Iran, like they arrested a family member of mine, and then gave me a message that I should stop my social media presence and stuff as such. So then we had to kind of go after vetting of, okay, who is in our group? Who is here? How do we keep the safety of the people in our group? And stuff as such, which was, again, out of all of our expertise. Like we had no idea how to do this thing. And therefore we started to change a little bit also our form of activism, and we started something in English. In German it's called Patentschaft, politische Patentschaft, which is basically bringing in like asking different parliament members to take the case of a certain activist in prison in Iran as their, is it called political scholarship or something? Like I don't know how is it called, maybe I Google it later. But yeah, we started to go a little bit further on this field and just try to bring in more politicians involved and try to do lobby work on the background, and use all of our chains of connections to make more of what we tried to achieve at the beginning. Anyhow, I talk a lot. You need to stop me at one point. I would just drop it at this point and give it to Collective.
Thanks, Ozi. Yeah, it was very, you know, for me, like I remember the first time I came across your collective, and also like the, you know, kind of the body of the queer people being also in this space among like many other Iranians, and like the statements that you all read, which later on we will go back to. It was just really amazing. I remember that moment that I watched it and I was like, wow, these people are like reading this statement among like 120,000 other Iranians in Berlin that are there. And that was really powerful. So yeah, as I said, we'll come back to that in a bit. Thank you. And Baha, and I guess like we have Bahar with Begoo Collective. So can you tell us a little bit about the formation of Begoo Collective as well?
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm honored to be in this space with these feminist thinkers and the audience. So I'm really aware of my privilege here. And I want to kind of follow up on some of the points that Ozi brought up in terms of not knowing how to do things and kind of figuring it out as you go. And of course, the scope of what Women, Life, Freedom in Berlin and Feminists for Jina are doing are different than Begoo Collective, which is a way smaller collective. We're a group of mostly artists. We're hoping to work on kind of longer term projects that are borrowing some of the ideas from our art practices, and we're also thinking about how to document some of everything that is happening. I'll give you a little bit of maybe background and then get back to this idea of not knowing how to do it and figuring it out for the first time. I think it was mid-October when one of the members of our collective reached out to me and was like, I know you've been posting all the time. I feel like I'm doing the same, and I have so many other friends who are doing the same, and I feel like we are lacking structure. We're all kind of doing the same thing and we're responding. I feel like there could be more that can be done outside of this fast-paced, responsive social media environment, and I would just like to talk. So that's how ours was started, and it was literally this one person reaching out to people that were a part of their network. And in the first maybe group meeting, we were only maybe 5 people. I can't remember exactly, but we were really small, and we're still a small group. I think with people who sometimes contribute and sometimes don't, if we count everybody, we're around 12 people maybe. So it's still a very small group. So one of the things that we talked about was, what can we do that can't be done in Iran right now? And a part of what we came up with was this idea of documenting everything that is happening and sorting it, because there's so much videos, so much imagery, so much information right now out there. And when you actually try to find them, it's almost impossible. So you see them on the day, but if like a week later you want to find something, you're like, what day was that? How do I get to it? How do I describe it? And it's really hard to actually get back to it. So we felt this necessity to, first of all, use our, I don't know, high-speed internet connection for something good other than watching YouTube videos. And also, it's something that it felt like a lot of my friends in Iran said every time that they even take a video, after they post it or they send it to somebody else outside of Iran, they immediately delete it off of their phone because they're worried that if they ever get caught, that would be evidence against them. So they literally can't hold on to information. And it felt like that maybe we could be the ones who can do that. So one of the projects that we're working on right now is to document specifically women and queer bodies in this resistance. And we're working on tagging them in so many different ways. So kind of like watching each video or looking at each image, seeing the context and tagging it through that context. So then later, if somebody is searching for it, they're able to find it. And the other thing that we were thinking about is this idea of transnationality that both of the other collectives are also working on. Our members live in Iran, some of them live in the US and in other countries. So we're, we're dispersed, we're in diaspora, but also we were thinking that we could learn through these conversations, through learning from other histories, other countries who have been through similar tyranny and state violence. What did they do in their countries? And to see if we can formulate some strategies for the future. And a part of what we're working on is also speaking to people from different countries of specifically the Global South and SWANA, who can give us insight as to what they think. And going back to this idea of not exactly knowing what we're doing, I think we're figuring it out as we go, because it feels like this hasn't been done before. And it's also very necessary to have these smaller groups and these larger groups who all have different functions.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really love, one of the things that I was thinking when I was trying to think about the collectives in diaspora that I was hoping to bring together, I really love the kind of like differences between how these collectives are formed, the way each of you work, from, for example, Feminists for Jina being a much more bigger group that is called more like a network than a collective, to Women Life Freedom, which is perhaps more like based in Europe, to kind of like a smaller group that doesn't have maybe as much like social media presence, but is doing more of like behind the scene work, and as you mentioned, kind of like a longer term works. And that's what makes this, I think, powerful and beautiful. These other many different ways that we can come together, right? Like doing work that is from protest, from existing in streets, from writing statements, to then archival work and many other forms of trying to make a difference, build a space, etc. So now I'm gonna get to a question which relates to some of these things we already discussed. But one thing that happened very soon after the killing of Mahsa Jina Amini, there was this escalation in the formation of collectives and networks. I would say, especially in the diaspora, where we saw this organic, beautiful coming together of people, especially under the umbrella of feminist collective work. And I want to talk about your thoughts on this, how you might see and analyze this escalation. What was it that brought us together so strongly, brought us so close? How was it different this time, if any? And what was the necessity? For me, I feel like something different was in the air about, in the last 44 years of Islamic Republic of Iran, there has been protests, there has been other movements, uprisings, but something about this, to me personally, and something that I also talked to my other friends both inside Iran and outside of Iran, felt different. And I kind of wanted to know, what are your thoughts about this? Anyone can go.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in if that's okay. And just before I get, this is such a good question. And I don't have the answer, but I have thoughts. But before that, I just wanted to say, I feel like I forgot to, actually wanted to give a little bit of just a clearer picture of what Feminists for Jina has done so far. So we had our October 2nd Global Day of Feminist Solidarity with the uprising in Iran. And then on November 22nd, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, Feminists for Jina called another transnational and global day of action. And this was like relating to what our friend from Begoo said, a deliberate effort to connect with and learn from this other feminist movements against dictatorship, patriarchal state violence, particularly in Latin America, which is that day was named, in honor of the state killings of 3 Dominican women who were challenging a US-backed dictatorship there. So consciously trying to link up with a kind of a global feminist pushback against patriarchal authoritarianism, right? And that's been a key part of, I think, what Feminists for Jina is trying to do, is be in solidarity with the specificity of the events in Iran and uplift that and help to keep the feminist part of that, at the center, but also to really say Iran is not in a vacuum, Iran is not alone. We actually want to make connections. So we invited people from many other movements and groups to come to our actions, to read their statements, to bring their solidarity greetings, and to share their experiences. And that to me felt new, felt part of what's new. So to sort of segue, and we've done other things like around International Women's Day on March 8th, and we had a big press conference in London, March 7th. So we've actually done a lot for a very short amount of time, but part of what feels new and different is this sense that we are participating in something that's already a global feminist movement, right? And really at sort of the radical anti-capitalist wing of that, right? So I think Feminists for Jina, and I'm not an official representative. Part of the collective formation is like, how do you have one person represent a collective of diverse people and views? You can't really. So I want to emphasize that one of the constitutive problems of that is, we can't exactly speak for, a group, which is fine. So I'm speaking for myself and based on my experiences working with Feminists for Jina. So I think part of what, for me, from my vantage point, I've been an activist in New York City for 30 years at least. And I've been part of the Raha Iranian Feminist Collective, which formed in the 2009 moment in solidarity with the Green Uprising in Iran and existed for several years. And I think what feels different to me now is that we have so much lived experience under our belts of kind of the problems of other forms of organizing. So I think it's no surprise to me that the rush has not been to form political parties, right? The rush has not been to consolidate parties or more hierarchical organizations that would have to cohere around, quite clear ideologies, that would have to kind of carry a line, so to speak, have a kind of very clear, that's not our historical moment. I don't think any of us have sort of the hubris to think that we know what the kind of political ideological solution is to the crises of our times. In fact, what we are the inheritors of many revolutions gone wrong, right? We are the inheritors of many leftist political ideologies gone wrong, that turned into various forms of authoritarianism and reproduced various forms of hierarchy, particularly around gender and sexuality. So we inherit that history of post-colonial revolutions and all of the broken promises, disappointments, betrayals, and the rest of it. And of course, particularly acutely in Iran. And so in this moment, I think we are trying to come together, without knowing in advance what the answer is, without knowing in advance what the solution is, but trying to think together in a non-hierarchical way, and trying to make space for difference, for some debate, that we don't all have to think the same way to work together. And if we can pull this off, and by I don't just mean Feminist for Jina, I mean all the collectives, we are making history, because unfortunately the history of the left and of kind of radical resistance is all too often a history of extreme rigidities, sectarianism, feuds, and fragmentation. And so trying to have a more horizontal collective model, I think, is also in response to that we don't want to reproduce that, right? We want to be able to move forward and work together across our many differences. And we're not single issue, we're not just about women's rights in any narrow sense, right? We're about full gender and sexual equality. And we see that as intersecting with full equality for ethnic, religious minorities. And we see, class inequality at the heart of, all of these oppressions and on, right? So how do we bring a really capacious, for lack of a better word, or maybe it's a fine word, intersectional feminism, right? It feels like the collective model makes space for us to figure that out together, as we go. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would just like maybe pick up from the end of your sentence and say like something that at least I started doing nowadays is to just even not use the term minorities, but rather marginalized community, because throughout all these past, let's say 6 months of the revolution, I just came more and more in contact with so-called minorities and saw that what sort of a big structure is behind them and how much they're just not getting enough press time or media attention on media, which is like in a way it's also like expanding this intersectionality of or the meaning of intersectionality for me. I think like one topic for me that was very to answer your question from the beginning, I think like one thing for me that was very interesting in this revolution was that it finally came to the time where the generation who actually was raised by the Islamic Republic was outside of the country, like to be honest, ran from the country, but however experienced with, in German we say with Leib und Seele, with your whole body and your soul, like how horrible it is to be under such an authoritarian propaganda machine that has like basically it's just like kind of the worst thing you can imagine, and then go to a school organized by worst thing that you can imagine, and then live in a society that is organized by the worst thing that is imagined, and then work in that society afterwards. Now, all of these things, if you're a cishet person from Tehran, it's still horrible. Now, every single other fact coming on top of it, like like your Kurdish, everything that just adds more to this, to the horribleness of this. And for my generation, who also remembers the Green movement, I was like 17 when that happened back home in Tehran. We were all sitting behind computers with like so-called ADSL from back then, where we had like high-speed internet of like 120 kilobytes, and then having to use so many different anti-filtering like VPNs, which back then was Siphon and something else, I don't recall it anymore. But like we were trying to make this chain of connection and being connected with each other and get information through very, very limited resources that we had. And I do remember that I was at one point, let's say a year and a half into the revolution, was getting newsletters of the news from yesterday of what happened in Iran. And it was like the toggle board was like this, this tiny. It was like so much information there. And it was just like a circle of people who was trying to bring this revolution on the technological and digital level and try to make a good archive, which attaches to what Begoo Collective is saying here, of literally archiving what's happening, like archiving this sort of resistance. And after this, overcoming this thing, because like at one point, Islamic Republic shut down the whole internet in the Green movement. There was 12 days that I couldn't even click on Yahoo Mail, and back then Yahoo Mail was like the thing we were using because Facebook was already out of the picture. You couldn't really open it, and it was a very horrible experience. That our only means of communication, like the mobile phones, was not working. It was just like the landlines that we could use, and I was in Tehran, and it was like 12 days that I could open yahoo.com, but I couldn't click on Yahoo Mails. It was somehow they blocked it, like this would not work, and it completely blocked our means of communication. But however, the resistance on, let's say, hacktivists or the digital community kept continuing, and we see it now that generation that learned how this technology works, how they can use it to our own benefits, and so how this government use it to kind of suppress and oppress us. How do we use it creatively? And then it comes to Instagram, Twitch, streaming platforms, YouTube, Twitter, and one after another, Islamic Republic tried to make a replica of it, an alternative that they can control it, having data servers in Iran and data centers in Iran, and trying to control these informations. Nevertheless, the bond that my generation has over online gaming with each other is something that Islamic Republic cannot break, because it's just, it's something that they cannot really get into it. It's like, I don't know, it's one of those places that they don't fit in. So to come to the question, I think the special thing about this revolution was that my generation was out and was like, you know what? 44 years, you guys couldn't do it. Step aside. Let us talk about the horrible shits we went through. I don't fucking care about who did what 40 years ago or whatsoever. I had to experience this Islamic Republic in this, like from 7 till 3 o'clock in the school, and then afterwards outside. And it's like, let me speak about this oppression, and let's forget about Pahlavi and everything else. Let's just for a second talk about what it feels to be there. And it's like exactly what nowadays the community, especially women, and I also wanted to say our Women Life Freedom Collective have a star sign behind it, where we want to address out that we're not talking only about cisgender women, but also trans men, to put it at the beginning, and then go on to trans women, non-binary people, and what's like just to open this discourse there. But okay, ADHD kicked in. I forgot where I was going with this thing, but yeah. Anyhow, all in all, we were trying to focus on this part, that what creativeness lacks in this revolution, and try to put that in the middle of this, an open room for basically the voices that was not heard, or a curated version of voices that has not been seen before. And that's basically, up to my eyes, was the unity moment, or however we want to call it. We also try to not use unity that much, because it's something that Khamenei and like they use a lot. So we use hambastegi nowadays. I don't know, like, how is that translated in English?
Or like maybe solidarity.
Yeah, to be more solidaric with each other. Because I hate it. I hate it when people start to chant in the demonstrations, like when there is some sort of conflict, everyone like Ettehad, like unity, unity. I'm like, no, 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 no. Let's just really get down to it. Are there fascists between us? Because if that's the thing, I don't have any unity with any of them. So let's talk about solidarity at this point. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was like really also interesting to kind of go back a little bit further than this revolution, talk about the green movement of Iran, which like Manijeh also mentioned, I feel like every uprising, every movement, every single point that we've had to be able to protest or show how we feel about you know, this oppressive regime has all, I feel like, all accumulated into this very moment that we are in. And with that, I'm gonna turn it to the Begoo Collective if you want to add anything as well.
I loved all the insight. The only thing that I want to add is, to me, I feel like a part of it was that a lot of us who left Iran, because we're specifically talking about collectives that were made maybe outside of Iran, but for and after this uprising and subsequently revolution, I think a lot of us grew up with this scarcity mindset for many reasons. Resources were always a problem and an issue, and also the way the government would want to keep us separated was through a scarcity, was through this fear, right? And I think what happened after leaving, for me at least, the country, was that something clicked. And with this revolution, or with the beginning of it, something shifted in my perspective. Instead of operating from this place of fear, I wanted to think about how to open it up, how to reach out to as many people as I can, how to basically operate from that place of solidarity that Ozi mentioned, and abundance. Like, how can you reframe the question and see if there is a new outcome, because we have already tried other ways. And that's not to say there wasn't solidarity before this. I also think that there is more and more of our generation and Gen Z who don't want this reality in the country. We didn't want it and we left, and the ones who are in Iran and don't want it are in the street. So I think we're thinking, how can we still play our role in this revolution? And maybe the way to do it was to actually come together. And what Manijeh said, this will be making history if we can pull it off.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just add one other thing. I feel like for me, you know, the past years, obviously also you know, moving from Iran when I was like 23. So these past, you know, the past decade, one thing that being in the US I've been learning a lot about is kind of ways that Black activists or like Black Lives Matter movements have been collecting and shaping and doing, you know, doing work, but also among my own friends, the way that they come together and have different notions of togetherness or collectives, or like this, you know, long practice of it, obviously. And I always appreciated that, and I've always like learned from it, but there was never a chance, for different reasons, just life, timing, this, that I feel like I could like build something like that with my fellow Iranians. And then again, I feel like it was something that was always in the back of my mind. I had like talked to my other Iranian friends, like really wanting to build a collective that would talk about, you know, our relationship to xenophobia, to racism, to the Muslim ban, to other things that we experience outside of Iran. But like really felt like we never had like a place to come together to even just like talk about it, to even just like be there to you know, get each other's opinion about different experiences we had. So I feel like for me, this also felt like very like kind of natural, as if like, okay, this is it, we have to do it, we have to come together, again, without like really wanting to form like a collective that is about any structure, but like really outside of necessity of wanting some kind of sisterhood that was a little bit more maybe like focused. So yeah, and I appreciate that every day. I'm grateful for it. We only have 10-15 minutes left before we go to the next part of this event, which is a reading. So I'm gonna ask the last question, which is that considering that we're all mostly operating outside of Iran, how, in your opinion, do you think our collectives in diaspora can build a bridge to specifically the feminist and queer collectives that are working inside Iran? That's a personal dilemma for me. It's something that I think about all the time. And I, working with different collectives or collaborators, try to like really think about how we can actually make sure that we stay connected, we amplify the voices, we understand how to take steps forward with this connection, with a bridge that keeps staying active between us and what's happening in Iran. Although I also recognize that parts of it always will be impossible because we're not living those lives. But how can we make the attempt at least?
I feel like I keep going first. I'm happy to wait this time. Ozi, do you want to go or?
No, it's a very tough question, so I don't want to start it.
Okay, I'll start, and I'll just start by saying, I'm not the best person for this question, because I was born and raised in the United States and my Farsi is not completely fluent. However, I'm a tiny minority. Feminist for Jina, as I explained, is really led and overwhelmingly made up of folks who grew up in the Islamic Republic, and many were activists there, as I mentioned. So I think one of the things that I've seen us do is translate, statements and letters and from activists and groups in Iran. And it's not just Feminist for Jina, but others like the Slingers Collective, right? But these like efforts to systematically translate so that people's voices, demands, perspectives can circulate, transnationally, and so that they can speak for themselves, and interrupt some of the misrepresentation or efforts at co-optation that I think are also running rampant in the diaspora. I mean, the thing that I could speak to, living in the United States, is I think the importance of diaspora as a space of politics. And I mean, yes, the whole point is to support the revolution in Iran, right? To uplift those voices and to support that as the key. However, we know that diaspora is not a neutral space, and especially the United States, where there are so many machinations going on, from monarchists to MEK, to the US State Department itself, right? And so I think that given that, it is really important to build alternatives, right? In the United States, it hasn't been like Berlin. Feminist for Jina hasn't been able to draw tens of thousands, we haven't become the central group mobilizing the vast majority of Iranians in the United States. And I think that is in part because of the kind of hegemony of a much more conservative, pro-monarchist, pro-Western intervention kind of politics. And that means, I think, that it's all that more kind of urgent and pressing to build an alternative, to build a feminism that is rooted in the self-emancipation of Iranian people, and that does take its lead from the actual demands and voices and experiences of people on the ground in Iran. That only they should determine their own fate. Only they know what freedom needs to look like and mean. And so, you know, one thing that I think we have to do in diaspora is just keep putting the focus back on that, and create alternative spaces where people who want to engage in feminist solidarity with the uprising in Iran can come and find us and participate, you know, in a feminist politics, again, that as I said before, that's intersectional, that doesn't look to Western intervention, that doesn't look to kind of going back in time, restoring monarchies and things like that, but that is squarely on the side of imagining a new future and trying to make political space for that, you know, for folks in Iran as much as possible.
Then I would follow the same pattern that we had from the beginning, and I absolutely agree with what Manijeh said. I think like that's yeah, that's probably the wisest way to go forward. And I should say that also the discourse, like something that is quite interesting, is that the discourse of Iranian in diaspora is different by country, and it's not like when I was back home, I always thought that okay, east side of Europe is like this, west is like that, north is like this, south is like this, and then America, la-di-da, but like each country and sometimes even cities, like now that I'm heavily deeply into it, I see that in NRW and mostly in Köln, we don't have the same let's say leftist circle, but rather the monarchists are there, and the discourse there is rather somewhat else, and trying to put all these different discourses together and find basically some sort of frame where we can sit together, where we can have joint action. That's quite the tough thing to do. And for me, it's always very tough to talk with the people who are in Canada and US specifically, because I think like that also has something to do with the political system that is institutionalized in that country, because people have different understanding, like they come directly outside of Islamic Republic or former kingdom and then jump in the new system and then only experience that. And I'm talking about ordinary people who don't have the access to university or this sort of education. So one thing that is very important is to make content-based platforms and educational material in very accessible language, translated, or I don't know what's like that would be the frame of creativity for all the activists. And this activism is not only the activists themselves, but also people who lecture at university, or people who have just like 20 years of experience in, I don't know, working in theater, and now they can share some sort of aspects of how to make a safer space with each other and how to talk with each other. A practice that we did, for example, in the collective that I brought it from theater in, is called deep democracy. So when you are sitting with 100 people and trying to make a collective decision, how do you make the decision? Like you will sit and talk and talk and talk, and at the same time there's a news that 3 people are probably going to be hanged, and you want to do something ASAP, but how do we do it democratically? So this deep democracy, I would just jump that, like bring that in, and then give the mic to Begoo Collective. The deep democracy works like this, that you want to decide, should we buy this iPhone or not? Let's say it like that. And then you talk, usually if you want to make such a decision, that would take an hour and a half, let's say, to like talk all together. You would talk 10 minutes and then make a first round of voting to see what are the vibes. And then you find the minority of the people who are, let's say, out of 100 people, 25 are against buying this. Then the rest of the time, which is 20 minutes, only the people who are against it, the minority, would get the microphone time. They only talk, and then we do another voting. If they can convince us, then that's it. If they can't, then we have made a decision. But that way we make sure that the minorities always get, or let's say marginalized communities, get the chance to speak for themselves. And this was a practice that really brought us very forward into making decisions ASAP. It has its own problem, because after 6-7 months of working together, there is a work dynamic, power dynamic, and then you know how to lobby with each other to get the decision you want to make or so on. So you always need to work like you always need to morph it in a different way. That for instance, adding new people, constantly thinking how can we approach different communities that don't have enough voice or have been heard much more during past few days and don't have enough voice. So let's work towards this direction. So I would say at the end of the day, I would be very happy if after this revolution, regardless if it comes to any results tomorrow or 5 years from now, I would say it would be very great if the community in diaspora learns how to work together and how to organize itself in this sense of democracy, and be very aware about the privileges they have, because like even when I look here. I mean, okay, forget about here. I would say it from somewhere else because I don't want to offend anyone. But everywhere that I get invited, mostly people are like, okay, Ozi has studied. Like, I'm like, yeah, but that was my privilege. And I'm out of academia. I'm working constantly on social media, and I'm only trying to make things for the people who don't have access to education. And I hate the fact that I was in academia because it's just privilege on top of privilege, trying to learn how to talk with the elite and how to talk like the elites. But at the end of the day, it's the people in Kurdistan who are bringing this revolution further, and not the elites in the university. We are just happy to use them for our papers that we are writing and making career off of it, which is horrible. But yeah, I mean, again, no offense to anyone in this room, but that's the reality of our form of activism at the end of the day. So trying to understand how this is a privilege and how to incorporate other opinions involved. That was, I talked a lot. Okay.
Wow, that was amazing. How do I follow on that? I definitely agree with all the points that have been made, and I'm learning so much today. I made some notes for myself just to see like which ones I should talk about. One is that I think just acknowledging the privilege, which was the last thing that was just mentioned, is really important, and acknowledging that each of us outside and inside Iran have different privileges and access to different things, and finding a way to share those privileges or access with each other. Of course, outside of Iran, we're in a safer space in general. So also thinking about how you can, again, going back to maybe documenting and archiving histories that have been systemically erased throughout the years, not just right now. Actually, right now is when we have an abundance of information and videos and imagery. And there are so many stories, so many histories that have been erased. And are there ways to go back and find those, to unearth them, to connect them to our experiences now, and through that connect with our friends, family, brothers and sisters in Iran. Also, I do feel that there are some, how do I phrase this? There are some concepts that are maybe specifically being discussed right now in diaspora, and I think they're really important, specifically queerness and the importance of supporting queer bodies. But we know for a fact that there are so many queer people, queer community in Iran who are dealing and struggling and fighting for their rights in Iran, and some of them are in really unsafe spaces if they speak out. So again, I think that would be maybe our role to speak up and make sure that there is a lot of space for that. And I want to also echo what Morehshin said, that when Azadî, you and Sanaz read that statement, that was just amazing. I watched it so many times. Thank you for doing that. Translating was already mentioned, but also maybe sifting through this information. I also think that our job is to make sure that we're not resharing or echoing the wrong news, especially when we had more of a fast-paced situation. Maybe now it's a little more different, but in the beginning there was a lot of disinformation, misinformation, then getting really confused, and then maybe having access again to the internet and to different sources. Maybe there are ways to either verify or wait until you verify something. And again, I think it's just important to make sure, as we're echoing, we're also being very mindful of safety and of truth. However, truth is, you know, maybe sometimes subjective, or you can look at it from different angles, but the one that we can find that is closest to the truth, or is at least recounting of a memory by the person who experienced it. Yeah, I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much for these amazing thoughts. I am always learning. That's something I know, that for me, it's always knowing that there will be things I say or do that are, you know, not correct, that I'm always like making sure that that growth happens. This is why it was also, obviously we're having this panel in English. Again, we're all living outside of Iran, but the coming together of us in different forms and shape, also I think one of the amazing parts of it is the potential to keep learning from each other, keep growing, keep having these conversations, even when they're difficult, as y'all mentioned, when we disagree about things, keep, you know, again, growing, and yeah, hopefully moving forward to a better place, all of us, in Iran, with Iran. And with that, I'm going to, because yeah, now it's time for us to like stop this part, and then I'm going to maybe go to one of the questions that is asked here by Galata. Chloe, would you like to read it, or how should we do this?
I believe Galata would like to be unmuted to ask directly, so I will give them the chance to do that. One moment.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much. I mean, I wouldn't probably need to reiterate much of the question. It's just been more of a dilemma for me because, you know, obviously we can't really police people or put up, you know, some kind of ethics guideline in terms of how to use images. Artists have a glorious history of exploiting narratives and images for their own purposes, or otherwise being very careful and thoughtful about them and trying to protect them. But it's been kind of a dilemma for me as an artist, as I see more and more, you know, those of you who are in New York, if you walk out to any Chelsea gallery right now, there's currently, at least I can think of, one or two shows in which these images are circulating in commercial galleries, in the practices of Iranian artists. And again, you know, we have no control over that. We can't, it's not exactly productive to go protest that or anything like that. But my question is more general, you know, in terms of the ethics of specifically dealing with images, and not to think of them only as representations of events, but as actual flesh and blood of people who have put their lives on the line. And while the practice of archiving is incredibly important, and archives are, you know, we need to think about them as some sort of a commons, but a commons towards knowledge, not towards privatization and profit making. So it's been kind of a dilemma, and I know a lot of you are artists or deal with images, and I just want to think with you through this question of how to handle this, how to think about this, how to move forward, and how to protect people and their images from private property, basically.
Yeah, Geller, thanks so much for this. It's a question that I think is really important, because as you mentioned, I feel like sometimes these kind of material can then become exoticized or used for profit, for, you know, in an exhibition, or like a way that when some of these things get presented, that, you know, there's always questions of ethics. So I would say whenever this kind of archiving or like reuse of these imagery, reappropriation of this imagery happens, I would let everyone else answer, but I think it's always important to ask, why are we doing this? Who is it for? How is it helping to move something forward with the revolution? And to be able to, step outside of our very like egocentric, narcissistic, sometimes way of practicing as artists, which I also always find very like troubling. But yes, I would let anyone else wanting to answer this. Sorry, I jumped in.
Very short answer to that, because we had this dilemma here exactly like after this big demo in the front of the Alte Nationalgalerie of Berlin. They were like, we wanted to do something about Iran, and they invited a bunch of voices that were not really in the scene, but they were very important. But it's like, it was really like nourishing the German perspective, which is what they wanted. So it was good in a way. But they reached out our collective, the owner, the curator, or like the manager of that gallery, and was like the museum, actually, it's a museum. And they reached out to us and they were like, we want to have this event and we want to invite you and we want to put sort of like a installation in front of the door, and it's a big print. And we were like, oh, great, we have lots of artists here and we have produced so much things. Do you want anything? And they were like, no, we asked Shirin Neshat to do something. And I was like, buddy, like, it's like, no. And then there was like a huge picture of Shirin Neshat having a poem by Furugh Farrokhzad written on herself. And like, all this oriental picture, and like every piece of the problem of the last 44 years coming back in there. So I would say it's also a little bit of focusing on the discourse of each city in itself. So I would say part of it is actually getting in contact with all those galleries or the curators and have an actual dense conversation with them, that what does this mean, or write about it. There is a book about breaking the social media prism. It came out 2022, I guess. I forgot the name of its writer. I can get it in a second. But it talks about how on social media, pretty much 99% of the fake news that circulates around come from a very tiny chunk of accounts, and then they start circulating, and it asks people instead of removing yourself from social media platforms to say, hey, this is not a safer space, actually ask the gray area people, the people who actually not very willingly get involved in conversations, to say their opinions, to come in and say and voice your opinion, because we always hear the two sides of the positive or negative, the people who support, the people who don't support, but we don't really hear the majority of the people who want to have the conversation about this. So this is something that I recommend to anyone who has any critique towards cultural institutions specifically, to actually voice in, to talk, because that's also one of the things I hate a lot in theater platforms here in Germany especially. The second you start criticizing something, you are alone, despite the fact that many people actually follow your, and I'm talking about my perspective from a queer Iranian immigrant here who has had a practice in Iran and had to be in exile here. Many times when I voice in my critiques, people are like, amazing, that was great, thanks. And I'm like, guys, it should not be my job to preach this thing. So it's also something to just really ask other people to also, yes, please take the time and write a thread on Twitter about this, about what you think, because it's very, very easy. It doesn't take that much time. It doesn't take that much time to reach out to a gallery. It doesn't take that much time to reach out to whoever they think they're doing their practice bad. And I believe people do really take these sort of critiques well, and if not, you learn how to kind of let's say upgrade your negotiation behavior to make positive changes. That was all.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to add to this, or should I move to the next question? Move. Or
I can also add a little something. First of all, that's a really great question, and I've seen so much art around this already. And I think what Morehshin, you said in terms of always asking ourselves as we're making art, if you were the artist, why am I making this? Who is benefiting from it? And who am I exploiting? Am I exploiting anyone? I feel like maybe you have to ask the harshest question to understand what you're doing. And also reach out to your community and ask them, if you're the artist again, ask them what they think. Like, hey, this is my idea for this art. Do you think it's okay to make this? Or is this weird? Like, what are your thoughts? And if you're talking to enough people within your collective or whatever way that you have found other Iranians, you can't ask somebody who is not Iranian because they won't have enough context to actually give you good feedback. That's to the side of the artist who actually wants to do better. The artists who are actually taking advantage of this, I think what Ozi said makes sense. We all need to critique them, and we all need to go kind of full force on calling them out on what is wrong about their work. And I believe people have started doing this. Not that galleries stopped working with Shirin Neshat, for example. They still work with her and she still has a show in Chelsea. But I do think that we are making changes. It's just going to be slow. And it's not just about one artist, of course. It's about this way of thinking and presenting our culture in a really specific, wrong way.
And if I can just quickly add, I'm not an artist, but I.
The next question also, Manijeh, I was, if you could also answer that because it relates.
About
more.
Scholarship?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just one thought to throw into the mix that I'm just trying to think about, and like, again, not an expert at all on the arts here, but it seems to me also that, like, you know, I'm constantly trying to think about what is the role of art in times of revolution, you know, and some of it is bearing witness, right? Some of it is documenting atrocities and, you know, things that are, so they're not swept away, and so that we always remember and we continue, you know. But I think some of what I feel like often is missing, and this is maybe a curatorial issue, or just again catering to how the perceptions of who the audience is, but I feel like sometimes what's missing is the aspects of revolutions that are about hope and joy and love and imagining otherwise, and we sort of only get the horror and the blood and the right, and we often don't get to hold on to those other aspects, which of course is exactly what the Iranian government wants, which is just to crush everything, so we can't even remember those other emotions and experiences. So I just want to throw that out there because I'm also trying to think about the role of art in these times. And I think, you know, as an activist scholar, I feel like the knowledge production that has inspired me and taught me the most is the work of other activist scholars. I feel like, you know, the best scholarship in my mind is scholarship that's informed by connection to living, breathing, actual movements, you know, in all of their messiness, and that, you know, that it's always a question of ethics and accountability. And like Bahar said, you know, situating ourselves, recognizing our privilege, but not, you know, not being sort of paralyzed and guilty by that privilege, because as Audre Lorde has shown us, guilt is sort of politically useless and counterproductive, right? The question is, how do you use whatever privilege, space, resources, access you have, right, to do ethical and accountable work that advances ideas, because I think ideas matter, right? That advances ideas that are going to help our struggles win, or that are going to help, you know, move our societies in the directions that we want them to go in. And I think that in some ways is so broad as to be the work of all of our cultural producers and scholars who feel deeply invested and connected to the Jiyan Azadî movement in Iran. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. I know our time is over. We have to move on to the next part of this, but I so much appreciate all of your time, and yeah, just having these conversations again for anyone who's joining who might be interested, this video will be available also with Farsi subtitles. Thank you for all the questions. I hope we can continue these questions. I hope we can continue, again, learning and thinking together. Chloe, would you like to take over?
Thank you so much, Morehshin, and thank you so much, Begoo Collective. Thank you, Ozi, and thank you, Manijeh, and just thank you so much for this incredibly generous conversation and discussion, and for joining us in this space today. And thank you to Morehshin, especially for making this space today and putting it together. It is my pleasure to, at the Rail, we end our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Rooja Mohassessy, to the stage. Rooja Mohassessy is an Iranian-born poet and educator. She is a 2022 McDowell Fellow and a graduate of the Pacific University MFA program in Oregon. Her debut collection, When Your Sky Runs Into Mine, was the winner of the 22nd Annual Elixir Poetry Award and was published in February 2023. And with that, I will pass it over to Rooja. Thank you so much, Rooja.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you all for including me in this wonderful conversation. It's an honor to be here, and I feel I'm truly filled with hope listening to you all. I'm going to start with a poem from my collection, When Your Sky Runs Into Mine, that just came out. And then I will read, as time allows, a few new poems as well. This first poem, the title of it comes from it's the words of a woman who was an anonymous woman who was imprisoned in the Evin prison. Death was like a desire. The advent of the gauze cape and black turban signaled the growing list of God's mandates. The gentle nudge under the chin that coaxed us to look up from our troubles, from dallying in nothing, no longer sufficed. We must have been that steeped in sin. We'd raise our heads in praise of the blended colors of dawn, pull our chadors over our heads without a second thought. True. Cup our hands before us. True, we asked mostly for the cup to pass from us. Yet we kissed the cubed dirt of Karbala and sipped on misfortune. We knew no doubt we were undeserving, were taught as much at school and for half a century prior, but we thought bitterness a remedy, a requisite part of the cure. We thought it an advance toward a generous plan, hatching above out of pity, if not love, to secure our spot in heaven. We cried Allahu Akbar, hope streaking our bleak skies. Then the black cloth appeared, yards suspended from the coat rack, determined to accompany us out of doors. Like our own guilty shadows, we could not shout, we could not shake. It fell before us at doorways, denying us access into yet one more room. It tugged at the back, felt our shoulders, and trailed as in the wake of a casket the pall dragged underfoot, muddied in the stampede of a martyred saint. Grudgingly, we learned to pull it about us, hold it in place. In fear of new edicts, fatwas condoned our arrest for the rouged contours of our lips, not what came out of them, our hands, the shade of polish on our nails, not whom we'd caressed the night past. In the cell, we sat swathed in our last layer of protection, prayed for lenience for the whip, to thrash us over, not under our chadors. They said, a bare square inch of our calves, our song called for repentance. And so they defiled us at night, since they said we were dirty already. This next one is dedicated to Nasrin Shakarami. Nasrin Shakarami is Nikah Shakarami's mother. Nikah Shakarami was one of the early faces of the revolution. All of you must have probably, who've been obviously following very closely, would have seen her, the girl standing akimbo, singing a song. She was a 16-year-old who lost her life 4 days after Mahsa Amini. And Nasreen, Nikah's mother, she took great risks and she recorded herself recounting the actual truth of the events of what really happened to her daughter while Nikah's aunt and uncle were arrested and coerced into making these fake confessions, and the truth of what actually happened, which was the body was not delivered to the family for 9 days. And after that, they came to the morgue the night before the burial was planned, and they stole the body. The Basijis came and stole the body and buried it in secret, which was a very common occurrence. Many families then got too scared to keep the bodies in the morgue, and they were keeping them in bathtubs. So this is dedicated to her, to Nasreen. Sweet is the truth of a nation on your lips. The river stones are listening. Yusuf Komunyaka. For Nasreen Shakarami, Nikah's mother. Tal. Bitter is the afternoon and minutes away from midnight when they are the street corner where her mobile phone is silenced for good, the post-mortem, 9 days and nights in a morgue where perspiring walls preserve forensic details, the truth on a toe tag, the once smooth and rolling slope of her skull depressed to a hollow, broken cheekbones, loosely housing scant teeth. They are the repeated and again sarkub, sar as in a daughter's head, unveiled, luring light. Kub is the pounding momentum of nightsticks. The rest of her Nasreen, you say, was solemn, as in wholesome, her fingers, thighs, the lengths of her arms, her soles, the torso stitched shut. They are sin, committed before the first light on the 10th day, najas, the ambush on the dead, the unchaste pairs of hands on the gurney. After your hands, Nasreen had dressed her in 3 pristine sheets of kafan after rites and ablutions, after the warm stream had run its course down the right and left length of her and left her scented with camphor and prayers. They, a grave hack through the shallow roots of thorn and thistle, behaste a hearse and daughter, lost in a convoy of country dust before the first azan. Tal, bitter now the silence on your street, Nasreen, Shirin, the truth of a nation on your lips. In a house in mourning, rows of gladiolas are lined up against the wall now, stiff swords in tall buckets, their tips catching inklings of light. We have time for one more. It looks like we have a few more minutes, yes. This one also is a newish poem that I've been working on. It's called Zan Zindagi Azadî. A plea for the ends of our daughter's hair and imported tubs of dye by our bathroom sinks, promising Western overtones in violet and blue for our interrupted narrative, where sunbeams still remember the ritual of reaching through a window to catch the careless toss of a handful of hair out of a face for highlights, growing out in tension and mistrust at the same ordinary pace as elsewhere. For our roots, founded with surahs and solemnity, pinned and pressed to grow yet lie in place under the imam's benediction, our shelter from the imperialist threat. When really, all our daughters need is a little diversion, same as elsewhere, volume, the cheerfulness of henna, the stripping bleach of an influencer to be seen on TikTok, Botox notwithstanding the dark and tweets and the chirping discontent and filtered static. Tonight we feed our men lavash pani sabzi, daughters refuse supper and walk away, turning their backs on the goldfish that swim for the reflection, crossing the dusk of courtyards where heavy-hearted the pomegranates crack and wash the autumn light in ablution. Tonight, at every street corner perches a wide-angled gaze boring into flesh. .68 caliber paint, plastic pellets, ammunition, cudgels are made halal tonight. Heaven ordained to arrive from Shah, Gharb, the 4 directions made halal tonight. In this twilight, before and after the Maghrib prayer, beatings will be halal tonight. Surveillance cameras roll and note the degree of coverage, the wantonness of our girls whirling in Western ways, flames devouring headscarves. The imported purple, neon, phrased ends of millennial hair gawking in lipstick pink. Tonight, the mobile phones held high by a chain of suns, corralled to document, and midriff bared on the pavement the panic pinch tips of two petite dunes, pre-adolescents, braless and blood, flowing unrestrainable into a pattern before she had a chance to bleed and be kissed on one cheek, then the other, by us mothers, her aunts, great aunts before Moradian had the chance to brush her clean-washed bangs out of her face, kiss her forehead, and compliment her for coming of age. Thank you all.
Wow, Rooja, that was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your poems with us today. And thank you again to this incredible group of speakers today from the Rail. And thank you as well to Melissa, who might be in the audience, for all of your help in preparing for today's event. From all of us at the Rail, we really appreciate you. And we'd like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring this program and making daily conversations like this one possible. For 22 years, the Rail has provided a platform for arts, culture, and politics in our monthly publication and public events. You can learn more about the Rail and how to donate to our programming via the link in the chat. And as is Rail tradition, we're going to turn on the microphones and allow all of you to say hello and goodbye as you leave. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
in this
you.
virtual
Thanks
space.
everyone, and for the beautiful poems. Thank you. So grateful.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. That was really
Thank you.
incredible.
Thank you, you guys.
Thank you.